Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kids in Crisis, our town hall. I'm Ed Berthium. I'm the news director at the Post-Crescent. And thank you all for coming out on this very snowy evening. Mother Nature did us no favors here, but I appreciate everyone making the effort. This is our third year of our Kids in Crisis project, which has been an incredible success when you talk about the number of people that we've reached on this, on our reporting, on the changes that have come about through legislative action, through funding. But I think the biggest success that we've had in the 2+ years that we've been doing this is encouraging people and bringing people together to talk about what is a very serious and significant issue, and that's our children's mental health. Tonight we are going to continue to meet some really brave and inspiring young people who are going to share stories with us that will educate and inspire us as we go on. So thank you again for coming out. Looking forward to a great evening. And now I'm going to turn it over to somebody who deserves a whole lot of thanks for the effort she put into organizing this event tonight, and that's our engagement editor, Jen Zettel.
As Ed said, thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Jen Zettel. I'm the engagement editor at the Post-Crescent. And as Ed said, this is the third year of our Kids in Crisis series. And in that time, we've reported on mental health programs. We've talked with families who have lost children. We've hosted town hall meetings all over the state in an effort to spark discussion and create change. We've seen lawmakers take action by putting more money toward mental health programming, but everyone here tonight knows we still have a long way to go. In the third year of the series, we're amplifying the voices of youth and young adults who are living with mental health challenges. That's why tonight we partnered with Story Catchers to bring those, to work with those young people to bring their stories forward. So with that, I will turn things over to Tara from Story Catchers. We will have a panel discussion. There'll be a brief break after the storytellers are done for us to reset the stage here a little bit. So we'll have a few-minute break. You'll notice that there are note cards on your seats for those of you here at the Paper Valley Hotel with pencils. So you can take that time to write down a couple questions for the panelists, because there will be an opportunity for the panelists to answer those questions. So thank you.
Hello. I am Tara Polcotti, the founder of the nonprofit Story Catchers, who has a mission to provide instruction, encouragement, but most importantly, a platform for the community's stories based on a really fundamental belief that we all have stories to tell. And that's exactly what we're here to do tonight, is to hear from 7 different stories, 8 different perspectives of youth and young adults living with mental health conditions. And it's so awesome to me that they're all from our community. These are our voices. And I think now more than ever that we're really primed and ready to hear from the younger generation. And just in a second when these stories start, I think you'll find, just as I have, that the opportunity to listen and to learn is a really magical thing too. So each storyteller is offering their own perspective and their own point of view and experience, and we've asked them to be really honest and true to what they want to share with the larger community. So with that said, though, I do want to be clear that most stories contain some elements that might be hard to hear, or that might even be triggering for yourself or for others. So if there's ever a point in time where you're listening to stories and voices that you need to get up and take a break, or grab someone from one of the wonderful organizations we have in the back, or catch your breath and return, do so, and the stories will be here waiting for you when you get back. So I'm not going to spend much more time belaboring this. I really am so excited to get to share these voices with you today. And our first set of tellers, Jonathan, part of our first set, he told last year at our Storycatchers mental health event, and he had the crown for being our youngest Storycatchers teller ever. But his little sister is here today to share her story with him, so she is happily usurping his crown at being 10, so being our youngest tellers. So can we ask Jonathan and Kenzie to come on up? All right, ready? Whoop. We're off to a great start here.
Yeah.
That's what I do to warm up the crowd for you. Okay. Hey, Jonathan, why don't you come this way? Let me just mother hen you here for a second. They want to make sure they can hear you. Okay. Talk right into that slow, right?
My struggles with mental illness began when I was 7. I developed anger issues and I would go into rages over very small things. I started counseling. Through that, I was diagnosed with anxiety. Things went on and counseling wasn't helping. I then began developing phases of depression. Soon after I started having problems with depression, I started making decisions that were quite questionable. I had risky behaviors. I would be super wound up, and I would go for days barely sleeping. I started getting into trouble a lot at school, so my mom took me to a psychiatrist. He said I showed signs of bipolar disorder. That's when I started medication.
When Jonathan was first showing signs of mental illness, I was only 5, so I don't think I was too aware of it. When I was about 7, I said I became more aware because that was when he was diagnosed with bipolar. I was confused because I didn't know what bipolar meant. I just knew my brother had it, and that's how he is. As time went on, I became more aware of what it is. I understood it more. At the end of 3rd grade, I did a project for school on bipolar. I wanted my kids in my class to know that even kids can have mental illness.
I started 7th grade this year. School has always been super easy for me. I've always gotten good grades and done my work. But this year has been different. It's not that the work is too hard or that the teachers are super strict. It's that I can't find the energy to get my schoolwork done. I prefer to just lay my head on my desk and put my hood up to escape. I kept falling further and further behind. I was trying to make a plan to do these different projects, but I just couldn't prioritize what to do first or which things are more important than others. My parents began pressuring me to get stuff done. They acted like it was a crime of the century to not have homework done in freaking middle school. No college is going to look at my grades from 7th grade and care that I didn't finish my assignments on time. But my parents started freaking out on me, and I couldn't communicate with them why I wasn't doing my work. They just didn't get it. My mom would freak out at me more than my dad would. She would scream at me, and then I would cry. She just didn't get it. Eventually, my parents had some meetings at my school, and they came up with a plan. My teachers don't give me homework anymore, but I have to make it up in class. That kind of helps, but I'm still falling behind on assignments. Sometimes it's easier to just not go to school, so I'll either pretend to be sick or I'll get so anxious about school that I'll throw up.
For the first time ever, Jonathan had a hard time in school this year. He stopped doing his work and fell far behind. He would sit on for days at the computer and not do his work. My mom would get so mad. She would yell, threaten, and punish me. It was very scary. I hated all the yelling and everybody being so mad. I would go to my room with my tablet, put my earbuds in, and watch YouTube, so I didn't have to hear it. My mom and dad would be super grumpy all the time, but my parents had some meetings at Johnson's school, and he no longer had to do his homework. Lucky, but at least now my parents aren't mad all the time.
Being as mentally ill as I am really can be hard for a 12-year-old. I've had suicidal thoughts since 6th grade. I missed a couple of days of school because of my mental health, but the incidents were isolated. More recently, my mental health has been at an all-time low. I've had suicidal thoughts as a regular occurrence. For 2 days this school year, a Monday and Tuesday, I was unable to move up off the couch. It was like I was paralyzed by my depression. I sometimes think the world would be better if I was dead. I'm such a burden on everyone. Life is just too hard. I don't want to feel like this anymore, but I don't think I'll ever get better. It seems like suicide is the only answer. But then I go to my mom and tell her how I'm feeling. She snuggles me close and reassures me that things will get better. I will not feel this way forever. She says she can never forgive herself if something happens to me. She says that her life is complete with me in it. She says that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I try to remember that, but sometimes it's hard.
It's so scary to me when I hear Jonathan talk about killing himself. He's my best friend ever, and if he was dead, I don't know how I could go on. We fight sometimes, but I love him so much. How could he say that the world would be better without him? It wouldn't. I would be so lonely and it would break my heart. One time when he was at counseling, he and his counselor made a safety plan for when he feels suicidal. Part of the plan is if you feel super down, you can come talk to me. When my mom showed me the safety plan, I sobbed and sobbed. It's a lot of pressure for a 10-year-old. I feel like I need to keep Jonathan safe. He's the older one. He's supposed to keep me safe.
Mental illness is lonely. People don't like to talk about it, so it can seem like no one else feels like this. Recently, there was a girl at school who was depressed. Another boy teased her about it, and he joked about suicide. That really upset her. The next day, I found her and talked to her. I told her about my story and my struggles with mental illness, and that she's not the only one at our school who is struggling with depression. One of my teachers also confided to me that she too has depression. I felt good that she trusted me with that, and I liked that she probably understands how I feel. While I don't want anyone else to feel like I do, I feel like less of a weirdo when I hear that other people around me are mentally ill too.
I know that there's kids out there that are just like me. Even if their siblings are in a really bad state and their parents give them a lot of attention, it doesn't mean that they don't love you. There's so many people that love you so much. For example, my brother's old teacher, who's honestly one of the nicest people I've ever met, is there to talk to me whenever I need to. My teacher helps too. And just know that your sister and brother will go back to normal someday. So remember, there is hope.
I should apologize to all the tellers coming after that. Sorry. And in the dreaded second position, but you're going to totally kill it. It's Julian. Come on up.
I won't pluck at you. Is this going to be tall enough? So they can see you. Make sure they can see your face.
I don't want to be too close to this. Is that loud enough? Okay. I haven't said anything yet. Okay, is that what? What? Yeah. All right. Sitting under the trophy cases in the commons of my high school, I was folded up closely next to my best friend. He was a small wisp of a freshman boy, bony, fragile, wide blue eyes, sad and tired. He was shorter than me and had barely changed at all since we'd finished 8th grade, and I thought we must have looked strange, especially that morning. Speaking in solemn, hushed tones, crunched up, hunched over, me not meeting his eyes, I pulled the sleeve of my blue sweater up, the one with the pockets, to show him long red gashes. In May of 2015, I was draped in shawls and skirts and coated in eyeshadow. I was fixated on Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, and my style was largely inspired by that. Very 90s goth mixed with 70s Woodstock attire. I was also a practicing witch at the time. I was the definition of coming-of-age movie quirky with a lot of black piled on. I was hyper-feminine in my deeply repressed transness and also suffering from PTSD and major depression. Just the year before, I had removed myself reluctantly from my living situation with my biological father and stepmother. I had previously been on a week-on, week-off schedule between there and my mom since they'd divorced. It had stemmed from me running away, not being able to take buried under secrets after 3 years of living that way. I had been groomed, threatened, manipulated. I wasn't able to feel anger towards my abuser, my stepbrother, but I was still feeling the weight of what was happening to me. I had left a note that disclosed the bare minimum, all I could bring myself to say, that he'd felt me up while he thought I was sleeping and thought that was okay. I also made up some other reasons that had to do flippantly with being made to do too many chores and my stepmother being mean to me. Whatever I could think of. I'd gotten on my bike and started off to my mother's, but I'd sent back. But this was only because I refused to say anything about why I'd run away. Upon my return, my stepmother and father sat me down and forced me to explain what my note had really meant in front of my very young little brothers and my abuser. I'd hyperventilated and cried, and after that, my father's solution was making my stepbrother apologize. That summer, I'd shut myself in my room and spent all the time I could out of the house wandering the neighborhood. They let me keep living there with him, and there's a lot I don't remember, although I do know that he lived with us until my stepmom read my diary, and then after a bunch of more things happened, then he stopped living with us. I don't know time, so we're just going to keep going. In a series of events, a whirlwind of detached confusion, I'd ended up at Appleton East High School the next year. What I'd been left with from what happened to me had made school impossible. I'd been having flashbacks in class and was failing algebra and English. I'd been called a crybaby by the guidance counselor and had been calling home and leaving halfway through the day at least 3 times a week. It was getting worse. Violently graphic, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, insomnia, blacking out, losing time, panic attacks, and I'd become addicted to self-harm. My memories leading up to the attempt are blurred at the edges, faded by time, and saturated with dissociation. They're hard to grasp, hard to hold, and I don't want them back. What I do know is like an apparition, completely removed from myself, I'd wandered into the second-floor tiled bathroom of my house, and lying on the cold floor, took a pencil sharpener blade to my wrist. I won't go into further detail, because the injury isn't important. I closed my eyes and stayed there for a long time, and when my eyes opened again, I was shivering, cold, and confused, but still breathing. I had a cigarette on the roof, a regular practice of mine, and fell asleep. I went to school the next day with my arms burning. After I showed my friend, he took me to the guidance office, very concerned. I probably owe him my life because I can't say what would have happened if he hadn't made me go. He held my hand while we waited for the social worker, and I cried, terrified of the consequences of my actions. I knew my parents would be angry, worried, not trust me anymore, because something very similar had happened before. Soon, I got in to speak with my social worker. My friend sat in there with me for a bit before she made him go back to class. I had to explain my injuries to her and admit that I'd meant to die but failed miserably. She asked what I did it with. I pulled the pencil sharpener blade out of my sweater pocket and showed it to her. "Oh, I really wish you hadn't brought that," she said, her voice stern. "That makes all this a lot more complicated." She called my parents and the school-assigned police officer. My mother was fuming quietly. Intense shame and guilt that made me sick stirred in my stomach. I hadn't dealt with that well, the guilt, since leaving my father's house. If she spoke to me, I don't remember what she said. She was calm and direct with the police officer, though. I'd brought a weapon to school technically, but they didn't believe I'd meant to hurt anyone other than myself. So we made a deal that as long as I went to the psych ward as soon as possible, they weren't going to put anything on my record or press charges. I don't remember much after that, until I was at the hospital. I know there weren't beds at the Appleton hospital, so I'd been sent to Bellin, actually. In the psych ward, you're not allowed a phone, shoes, anything with strings, anything sharp. There are white walls, nondescript bedrooms, mandatory groups. The people around you are volatile and often loud. Some are there because they've hurt others. One boy there with me had problems sleeping, so they strapped him to a bed at night. Now, I want to make a point that lots of people are scared of the psych ward, but I do think it's very necessary. And like I'm about to say, it really gives you perspective. And it's not like a bad place. It is scary, but it makes you want to get better. I was there for about a week. I did what I was supposed to do. I participated in group, did the worksheets, talked with counselors, ate meals, and did activities. I wasn't sure how I felt about my recovery. A huge part of me was still very attached to the disaster version of myself. It was safe, it was what I knew, but I wanted out and I wanted my life back. When my parents visited me, we barely talked about anything of importance. I felt detached from them, avoidant, and when I was released from the hospital, I was trying very hard to be optimistic about how my life would be, to move on from the dark place I had been in. My parents were adamant, though, that I not forget that I'd hurt them with what I'd done. And I understand that I broke their hearts, and I understood then too, but they also accused me of lying to them about how bad I was doing before my attempt. And I wanted to die, so why would I tell them if I wanted to succeed? Also, at least they said that at the time, they didn't believe that I tried to kill myself, and that I'd been saying that for attention. I felt really drowned in guilt throughout the experience, really drowned in shame, and I do understand that I hurt them, but I had a lot to learn, and I felt very young, and I was only a freshman. I didn't feel like they understood the magnitude of what I'd been dealing with that year. I needed love and care, and I needed support, and I needed to be taken care of, and I wanted to feel like my life was worth living. And I don't think they knew what to do. It was a trauma for them too, especially my mother. She still checks on me if I'm in the bathroom too long. And after I'd smoked on the roof again one night after coming back, they'd taken off my door, which, you don't really deserve privacy if you tried to kill yourself. It's not really that important. But I resented them for those sorts of things. And I felt like they were treating me like I was evil. And it didn't make me want to be open with them or try to do better. But being isolated from my friends and social media since I'd been grounded from it after the hospital forced me to really sit with myself. And I think that was really what I needed. I wrote in my journal constantly. I wrote songs. I got better at ukulele. I spent time outside and with my sister mostly. I grew up so much that summer, but it didn't fix me. None of the guilt about what I'd done made me better. It didn't knock my hurt out of me. And I think my parents were scared of losing me and were willing to do whatever they had to do to make sure I was safe. I think some parents care a lot about their reputations, and I think having kids that are struggling makes them feel like they're bad parents. But, it's not always something you can do. It's not always something that you can fix. And I'm not trying to guilt or shame anyone. I think this is a common way that parents deal with this sort of thing, with their kids being suicidal or hurting or self-harming. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, it doesn't really help to make them feel bad, you know. But freshman year was my lowest point. I had hardly any self-awareness, but I had to hit rock bottom to really know myself and to become what I am today. And I'm still struggling with mental health. And, you know, growing up comes with challenges and stressors, lots of them, especially being a senior. And I guess the takeaway here is that it does get better, and as cliche as that sounds, it's true, but only when you grow up enough to have the tools to recover. And you're not always ready to grow up yet. I do think as a society we are improving with awareness, and we're growing, but there are still strides that can be made. And the most important thing is that kids need kindness, we all need kindness, and the world is a big, rough, scary place for a lot of people. And as cheesy as all this like sunshine and rainbow stuff sounds, the hurt doesn't have to be there, or at least not as bad forever.
Thanks, Julian. Next up is Hannah. Yeah, you're good. Hannah and I have a propensity to do all things awkward, so she was just checking to make sure she was decent.
Is it tucked into my leggings? Talk about crisis. Sorry, that was inappropriate. All right. Let me just get myself together here. This is, I've done a few Story Catchers events in the past, and this is kind of a different tone. A little nerve-wracking. And as Tara said before, I'm just echoing, my story does contain some talk of sexual abuse and self-harm. If I can read it. I can read. Okay. I was 9 years old when Elizabeth Smart was abducted from her bedroom, in her quiet home, on a quiet street, in a quiet neighborhood. I remember coming home from school that day. It was the end of the year, and we were just finishing up. Nothing special was happening in my world. My family watched a lot of CNN and PBS, so it wasn't surprising to have these channels on in the background as we all went about our days. Sorry. I sat down after school and glanced to see breaking news banners everywhere on the screen, and I was drawn in. I learned that this young blonde girl had been kidnapped, that the predator had to walk through her sister's room to get to hers, that he cut a hole in an open window screen to enter the house. It was too close to home for me, because to get to my bedroom, you had to walk through my brother's. We routinely slept with the windows wide open in the summer, during those humid summer nights, to avoid using the bulky window unit air conditioner. It's like I could feel my pupils growing larger and larger every minute I consumed this media. And from that night on, I developed a tricky relationship with childhood onset OCD. My day-to-day life was fine. I was productive at school, I did my chores at home, but the second my mom or dad would say it's time for bed, panic would set in. I would walk on all 3 floors of our 100-year-old house and lock each and every window and door. I'd check them again to make sure I got them all, and again, and again. The process would take almost an hour, and it was a quirky habit at the beginning, but it got to the point where I could not physically go to bed unless I knew that all the windows and doors in that house were locked. I remember one night in particular, in the fall, a few months after the initial shock of the news reports. My mom wanted to help me break the habit, but struggling with communication, she didn't quite know how to help or what to say. She stopped me one night during my routine and told me, "Go to bed. Don't worry. No one's going to kidnap me. No one's going to hurt me." I remember absolutely losing it, sobbing, and my dad begging her just to let me do it, that I could have much worse habits, and if this was my thing, well, it could be worse. That didn't sit well. My issues with OCD would prove to be a wrench between the two of them. My dad wanting me to just get it out of my system, my mom to prevent further damage. Eventually, apathy set in and I gave up altogether. I wouldn't say all of my youth mental health issues stemmed from this incident, but when I look back at my life, it's a clear trigger. I wish I could stand up here and tell you that I woke up one morning and that I got over it, that I suddenly didn't rock myself to sleep at night at 10 years old, but I didn't. Mental health would prove to be a huge struggle for me until present day, as I stand here at 25 years old. It didn't get easier. In fact, it got a little more complicated and complex when I entered high school and faced bullies and drama, friends changing, and drugs and alcohol. I succumbed to my poor mental health. I tried to kill myself in the spring of my sophomore year of high school. I spent some time speaking to counselors and in psych wards. I struggled with self-harm for a decade before finally understanding the root of the issue and why something called self-harm could make me feel good, could make me feel better. But after returning my junior year, I tried everything in my power to graduate early. I did not want to be there anymore. I had everything I needed, everything signed off, ready for me to submit. My parents and the principal were on board. But something told me to just wait, just a little bit more, to figure it out, to try again. And I did, but it didn't get any easier. I found myself dating drug dealers, dealing with rape, sexual assault, and opiate dependency issues. But it's like I could feel something in my soul, like a tugging inside of my abdomen, to just keep going, to think of the funny stories I could tell later, and to try again. Without such trials, there can be no virtue, I'd tell myself at night. I'd stand in the mirror in all of my glory and chant under my breath. Without such trials, there can be no virtue. So I stayed in high school. I dumped the drug dealer. I stopped taking all of those pills and started talking to my doctor, who was an adult that I trusted and had an objective view of my situations. I needed someone to help me stand up for me, if that makes sense. I needed the midnight crisis line chats and panicked emails to my caseworkers. I needed to know I wasn't the only one on my team, and I wasn't. I never was. Senior year of high school, I got homecoming queen. I spent the last 6 months of high school the happiest I had ever been, surrounded by my friends, who I'm still close with today. I was open and candid with my issues, quick to make a joke at my own expense, just to get people to laugh, because it made me laugh. It made me feel better, so I made me feel better. It's difficult to come up here and give you the highlights of my low life. There's endless words to be said about the individual situations I've been in, about the nights I've spent on the bathroom floor, about the tanks of gas I've wasted going to bad parts of town. I could talk for hours about why or how, but I'll leave you with this. Even if you don't feel the pull behind your belly button like I did, even if you don't have a trusted adult rooting for you, you can look at yourself in the mirror in all your glory and repeat, without such trials, there can be no virtue, because I promise that victory is so much sweeter in your bloodstained Sunday's best. A quote from my favorite author, Augustin Burroughs: "Some damage is too severe, some harm endures, and what you have to do is accept it. And by accept it, I mean don't be the paralyzed person in the bed who is waiting to walk again. Realize it's never going to happen, and find some other way to get around. Swing from a vine, get a Mad Max wheelchair, anything but wait." I found reprieve in memoirs and autobiographies, and authors I respected and admired, writing about their struggles in a humorous way, because a book was an escape I could carry in my backpack. While I know and respect that mental health affects those across all ages and all genders, I want to speak specifically to young girls, mostly from experience, well, all from experience. As a young girl with high expectations of what my teenage years would be, it shaped up to be very different than what actually happened. There's this poem written by Denise Frohman that I want to recite for you before we part. "I heard a woman becomes herself the first time she speaks without permission. Then every word out her mouth, a riot. Say beautiful and point to the map of your body. Say brave and wear your skin like a gown or a suit. Say hero and cast yourself in the lead role. When a girl pronounces her own name, there is glory. When a woman tells her own story, she lives forever. If this poem is the only thing that survives me, tell them this is how I happened. Tell them I built me a throne. Tell them when we discovered life on another planet, it was a woman, and she built a bridge, not a border. I heard this is how you make history. This is how you create a new world. So, now is your time to go out and wear your skin, create a new world as I have done before you. I stand here because it is possible to climb out of the old one, to be a queen in your new one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we've got Patrick. Do you want this down? Thank you.
Is this good? Okay. My experience with mental illness began before I even knew what mental illness was. My earliest memory of any mental health troubles was from when I was 6 or 7 years old. I was watching Courage the Cowardly Dog, and the premise of this specific episode was a depressed scientist wanted the world to be as depressed as he was, because no matter how hard he tried, he could not find any happiness. To the adult me, this is a very well understood feeling. To the 6-year-old me, this left me in a pit of depression long before I could even verbalize or understand what I was feeling. I experienced extensive verbal abuse from my grandfather and bore witness to near constant verbal and physical fighting between both my grandmother and my grandfather. I cannot recall a single nonviolent day from the age of 6 to 13. Unbeknownst to me, this would lay a groundwork for my biggest problem in my life, my bipolar disorder. The thing about bipolar disorder is that it often needs some sort of catalyst to fully kick your ass. I received that catalyst at around 14 years old. At that point, I had decided to live with my mother and moved from Arkansas to Tennessee. The move was both volatile and traumatic and nearly destroyed all good family ties that I had. When I reached my new home, I had no friends and no support system. At this point, my mental health spiraled down further and further to the point where I was so depressed and hypomanic that I had a psychotic break. I woke up one day and had a very angry and very violent voice telling me that if I couldn't have anything nice, then no one else could. Other people's happiness were a blight on this voice's existence, and he wanted nothing but the worst for those people. Eventually, he did slip back into my subconscious, but because I dealt with him for so long, and I used up so much energy, I had slipped into a dissociative state. I spent anywhere between 3 to 6 months feeling zero emotion. I cannot recall how long because time was meaningless for me at this time. However, I did eventually relearn to feel my emotions, but that was a challenge. Skipping ahead to my 23rd year, and at this point I've been dealing with my bipolar disorder for about 10 years. This was a very difficult period in my life. I was back with my grandmother and my depression had returned in full force. At this point, I had been in heavy depression for 9 months. However, it seemed like my life was about to turn around. I met a girl and she brought color back to my world. She brought out a fire in me that I thought had been completely exhausted from years of arduous battles. This, however, was short-lived. She broke up with me and it nearly killed me. I've been suicidal since I was 13, and up to that point in my life, it had been manageable, but at that point, it hit a point where I could no longer manage it. I don't know how many times I thought about walking in the traffic, nor how many times I got close to doing it. But, again, this feeling wasn't new to me. Since then, I did not have much life expectancy on my current path. I reached out to a friend in Menasha. And just 2 months after my breakup, I was in Menasha to start my new life. Of course, nothing is easy, and 4 months after my arrival, I was homeless. I stayed in the warming shelter the first night, and I fell asleep that night in an anxious mess. I woke up the next day, and the only thought in my head was that it all had been a bad dream. Of course, it's reality and not a dream, so of course the nightmare had only just begun for me. I spent the rest of that day crying. Eventually, I got into Homeless Connections. This is where I spent the next 7 months of my life. This is also where my anxiety and bipolar disorder got unforeseeably worse. I was dealing with massive paranoia and social anxiety, so I was depleting my energy stores rapidly. The lack of mental energy led to a swift decline in my mental health. While I was at the shelter, I had my first major anxiety attack. It felt like I was going to die. I knew I wasn't, but that really didn't offer any consolation. My anxiety got so bad at times that I had to have my food brought to me so that I could eat it in a closed room by myself. Never believe a person that says anxiety is fun. My bipolar disorder also got worse during my stay. There were days where I had no idea what I was feeling because I was feeling too much at the same time. Think of it as like having 10 radios on full blast playing different radio stations right at your head. And on other days, I felt nothing all over again. Some days, some of the worst days were where I was so agitated and hostile that I had to lock myself in the bathroom for hours at a time so that I couldn't harm myself or others. There were, of course, the obligatory visits back to depression, where I couldn't move at all, and all I could do was cry for hours on end, wishing to die. It was here at Homeless Connections that I had my first close encounter with suicide. I didn't actually attempt to kill myself this time, but I came very close. After that, my mental health had degraded to the point where I could no longer stay at the shelter. After the shelter, I slept wherever I could. I couch surfed, I slept on seldom used walking trails, in parking garage, and even in cemeteries. My life was a roller coaster at this point. Some days I was elated just to have made a fire, and others I wanted to drown myself in the river. Eventually, a friend told me about Project Yes, a county-run program that offers young adults support and resources. Through Project Yes, I was able to secure housing, and by December of 2016, At this point, I had been sleeping on the streets for 2 months. Now that I had stable housing, I was finally able to work on things that I needed to work on. I got back into school, and most importantly, through my journey, I found my passion. I had wanted to be a peer specialist. Time was my ally this time, and I found the peer specialist training pretty soon after. The training would have been about 4 months long, but without pausing to take a breath, life did the thing. The training fell through within 3 months, and then my financial aid fell through also. Everything I built my life around had fallen through. Unlike last time, I actually did try to kill myself this time. I obviously survived the attempt, but I was in a terrible place for days after. I finally decided to seek help and called Iris Place and asked to stay. The next day I was there, and within 3 days I had almost completely recovered from my suicide attempt. At the end of my week there, I was completely rejuvenated and felt like me again. I started to want to live and try again. Shortly after my stay, I got the news of a new peer specialist training. While waiting for the class to start, I had successfully appealed my financial aid and was able to return to school the next semester. The peer support training went far quicker and was over in a little over a month. Almost a year after I escaped homelessness, I was able to get my certification as a peer specialist. I've never been more proud of myself. Through my constant pursuits, I eventually got a job working in Iris Place, where I have the unbelievable opportunity to help those in the same way I was helped. What I'd really like to impart on you all today with this story is that recovery is possible. It's a challenging road, to be sure, but because I persevered, I survived suicide attempts, homelessness, and a lifetime of debilitating mental health concerns. I had to work twice as hard in my life to get half as far, and it was never easy. You will falter over the course of your life, but the trick is to learn to lose a little less of yourself with each fall and learn to pick yourself up with the message that it's okay to fall sometimes. With the right support system and perseverance, you can overcome your mental health struggles and, most importantly, thrive.
Thanks so much. Next up, we've got Mallory.
My story starts my freshman year of high school. I was at Appleton North. I was new. I had just moved schools, didn't really know anybody, stayed by myself, went through my entire freshman year without any friends. I started cutting, was anorexic. I was 80 pounds until my junior year of high school. My parents noticed that I started cutting. I ended up at St. Elizabeth's. I was there for 2.5 weeks because I refused to cooperate with anyone, because I didn't want to be here. I was all by myself. My parents took me away from North because they decided that wasn't a good school for me. They moved me to Kimberly. Things got better. I was on an antidepressant, I was eating, I was gaining weight. Things were better. I started dating somebody. It was good. And then I graduated high school. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I moved in with my boyfriend, got away from my parents. And then he got abusive. He would hit me, we'd argue, he'd tell me to go kill myself, that I wasn't worth it. I took everything he said, and I did it. I overdosed on a bunch of painkillers, wound up at St. E's again. I took Matt back the second time because I decided that he didn't mean what he said and that he still loved me. So I took him back, moved back in with him, wanted to start a life, got pregnant. We got fought so bad one night, he pushed me down a flight of stairs, caused me to have a miscarriage. After that, he beat me so bad that I was in the hospital for 2.5 weeks because I thought I couldn't do better than him. Well, my parents finally convinced me to come back home. So I did. I moved back home and things got better. I didn't let people in as much. I still was kind of a loner. I had a couple close friends from Kimberly. Then I met Jarrett at a party one night. Best thing that ever happened to me. He was always the one that told me, "You can't kill yourself, I need you here." Until May 12th of 2016. I found him hanging in our garage. I never saw any of it coming because I was too focused on myself. That situation has caused me to have very bad PTSD. I am on sleeping meds, so I sleep at night. If my friends spend the night, I get up continuously and make sure they're okay, that they're still next to me if we're sharing a bed. Like, it's hard. But after he passed away, I told myself that I would never put my parents through what I went through. I would never put my friends through what I went through. So every time that I'm depressed, suicidal, I make a phone call to somebody. And usually they answer and they'll talk me down and tell me that they don't want to go through what I went through. Because I buried my partner at 20 years old. I wasn't even 20 yet. I was 2 months from being 20. And then after all of this has happened, a couple weeks ago, I found out I have borderline personality disorder. So that's been a struggle because I don't know who I am anymore. After all of my trauma that I've been through, who am I? It's been a hard struggle, but I'm slowly starting to get on meds and figure out who I am as a person, and I'm happy. I look at all of my struggles and everything that I've went through, being abused, being anorexic, finding the love of my life dead from something that he promised me he would never do. I continue my life, and I choose to still be here, and I want everyone else to feel the same way that I feel, because it's never worth it to put your family through that much pain and hurt, knowing you had a full life ahead of you.
We've got 2 more tellers. The next is Katrina. Come on up.
They're giving me the entrance, right?
The relief.
Noise, come on. Wow, well, thank you so much for having me today, you guys. It is an incredible honor to be able to share my story amidst the stories of everyone else here. I don't normally get too nervous before I speak, but after listening to you guys, my heart is fluttering, and I want to give hugs to each and every one of you. My story, I want to give you a little bit of background on before I tell you how I got here and how I was able to turn my life around. My name's Katrina. I am your current Miss Green Bay Area 2018. But I don't want you to think of me like that. I want you to think of me as the 19-year-old kid at the checkout counter, or your best friend's niece, or your best friend's daughter, your best friend, your kid, someone just your average person. Because that's who we all are, and that's who we all struggle as. And I know that everyone has a story to tell, and I want to let you all know that before I start my story, you have to remember that you don't know what people are going through. You don't know what their story is. So let me take you guys back to my second grade year. And I apologize for shaking. I had anxiety. I didn't know what it was. That was back, back in the 2000s. People didn't talk about mental health. They didn't talk about the issues that were at hand, especially for children. I remember writing in my journal and spelling anxiety with a G instead of an X. And I had to figure that out, and my family had to figure that out along with me. I remember going to school in the car with my mom and screaming and crying because I didn't want to get out and go to school. And I remember talking to the kids in my class and not wanting to be made fun of because I was embarrassed. I got bullied a lot in elementary school. I had a unibrow, I had glasses, and curly hair that I had no idea how to deal with. And there were probably about 10 girls in my class. And throughout elementary school, they slowly stopped talking to me because I hung out with the boys, and I played kickball. But I also liked to play with my friends that I had that were girls, but they decided that because I was friends with the boys, I could not be friends with them. And one day in 5th grade, I remember sitting on the playground, and I watched all 10 of those girls walk inside of that school and tell the guidance counselor that they all hated me because I was friends with the boys and that I must be a slut. I was in 5th grade. And I chased them into the school to see where they were going. And I remember them running away and slamming the door in my face. So I was pulled into the guidance counselor's office a few days later to talk with the girls in person. And I just remember them telling me how much they didn't like me and how it was a problem that I was friends with the boys in my class. So I didn't have a lot of friends in elementary school, and that led into my middle school. In the school system I'm in, you go to school with the same people from elementary school all the way through high school. Those same 100 kids in your class. So I didn't have a lot of friends in middle school either, and I started to find a group, actually, that I wanted to be friends with. Unfortunately for me, they were more girls that the popular girls did not like. And we were given a nickname, and excuse my language, we were called the It Bitches. Because we hung out with guys, and we did not hang out with the popular girls. And we hung out on the weekends instead of staying in to study. Through that, I began hanging out with different groups of people at different schools. And I had my first sexual assault in 8th grade. I was on a school bus trip to a ski lodge, and I was asleep in the back seat, and I woke up to one of the boys in my class on top of me. This was very shocking for me, and I talked with my friends about it, and they didn't know how to believe me or what to say, so they just let it be, which was fine. I didn't get it, and I moved on. But that next summer, going into my freshman year, I was pushed into a closet, and I was forced into a 7 minutes in heaven, although I was banging on the door and screaming to be let out. And none of my friends let me out at all. So then from there, I started thinking to myself, okay, this must be normal. This must be something that every girl goes through, right? this is how middle school is, this is how high school is. And I remember walking down the hall in my high school and being pushed into the locker by boys so that they could grab me. They could grab my chest, they could grab my butt. And they would spank me in the halls or when we were at football games. And I just let it go because I figured this is what happens to girls. This is normal. This is what boys get to treat girls like. And then my sophomore year, I went to hang out with a boy who I thought was my friend. And I was raped that night. And at that point, I decided that if guys don't respect my body, why should I? And I started drinking at 15. And I started smoking weed, and I started cutting myself because I hated who I was. I didn't like that somebody else determined what happened to me and how they determined how it made me feel. I was in with the wrong crowd. I was doing the things I shouldn't have been doing, and I hated it. And I hated myself so badly that one day during that summer, going into my junior year of high school, I decided I was going to overdose and kill myself. And I texted 3 of my best friends at school, and 2 of them responded, "Oh, it's okay, take a bath, you'll be just fine." And the other one believed me. And she came to my house. She left her brother's birthday dinner. She found me sitting on the floor in my room. I had just been cutting, and I was going in and out of consciousness. And I remember her kneeling down with me and grabbing my hands and my arms and just screaming, "Katrina, please come back. Katrina, don't leave, don't leave." And she was bawling. My mom came home, and she found us in my room, and she called Nurse Direct. And they told my mom that they should bring me to St. Elizabeth's Hospital. And so she did. And I spent almost a week there to get the recovery that I needed. And it's true what you said. The walls are white. You get a sheet to cover up in. You can't talk to your family, only over the phone. My sisters were away at summer camp, and my brother wasn't allowed to come see me. He sent me a letter, and they had to read it and check it every day. Luckily, and this is carried along with me, someone had donated tie blankets that year. And I got to pick one, and I got to keep it. And I picked one with little paw prints on it because I missed my dog at home. So now every year what I do is we tie blankets of our own, and we drop them off at St. Elizabeth's so that everyone there can feel the same way that I did, that they're not alone, that there's a reason they need to get back out. After I got the help that I needed, I was recommended to Catalpa Health. And they became my family because they treated me like family. And they really, really helped me to connect back with the family of my own and to remember who I was, to not lose sight of that girl that I can be. From there, leading into this, I met a woman who, after talking to me for a while, not knowing anything that I had been through, told me that she believed I could be Miss America one day. And I laughed at her. I didn't know what pageants were. I didn't know how to deal with my curly hair. I didn't know how to put on makeup, really, other than black eyeliner that I wore every day in middle school, or even how to wear dresses or heels. But she kept talking me into it and reminded me that it was a scholarship pageant and that you could pick a platform. And that word stuck out to me and it hit me. And I was like, what's a platform and what can I do with that? And she's like, it's something that you're passionate about, that you can travel your state and talk about. And I knew I want to talk about teen suicide prevention awareness because I don't want anyone else to feel the way that I have. And if I can save one life, I know I've done my job. So that year, I was appointed Miss Appleton's Outstanding Teen 2015, and I competed at Miss Wisconsin's Outstanding Teen. Nothing came of it. But what came of it for me was that I remembered who I was. And I share my faith about that God kept me here for a reason, that he gave me a second chance at life. And what I feel is that my second chance is to speak about my story and to share it with others who are going through something similar or the same thing, so that they know that they are not alone and that there is hope. And I came up with my organization, which is Teens of Tomorrow, Teen Suicide Prevention Awareness, where I remind teens that they're irreplaceable and that if they leave this earth, there is no one else who can fill their spot. It is very important to me that we stop the stigma, not only in our community, but in our states and in our nation. And I hope that one day I will be able to serve as Miss Wisconsin or Miss America in order to continue that across our country. And it is opportunities like this and events like this that give me so much more hope. That there are ways that we can continue to talk about it and that we can stop the stigma and remind others that they need to stay, no matter what. That mental illness is something that you can fight and is something that we can help to end. So thank you all for coming out today and for listening to me share my story. I believe that I am just like everyone else, and that if I can go through something and get through it, so can each and every one of you, or anybody else who is struggling. And honestly, I got a great opportunity out of it, and I am so grateful for where I am now, and I hope that through this, I can help others to get there too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. One last story. It's Elena. Come on up.
Hello everyone, my name is Elena Hansel and I'm here today to make my voice heard. 1 out of every 5 young people will experience a mental illness or mental health disorder. Today we gather here today because we are either living with a mental illness or have a family member or friend dealing with a mental illness. But most importantly, we are here because our voices really do matter. Our stories really do matter. We have the power to make a difference in the personal experience needed to be taken seriously. My experience with mental illness might be similar to some people's experience with mental illness, but in other ways, it's probably different. 1 year ago, I was raped. Because of this incident, I suffer from depression, anxiety, and PTSD, which is common among the population. However, suffering in silence from these illnesses can make you feel like quite alone. Over the past year, I have lost interest in many things I really used to enjoy. I dealt with suicidal thoughts, feelings of hopelessness, and I became very withdrawn from friendships, family, and school gatherings. I spent most of my time alone in my room and many times crying myself to sleep, hoping that I didn't wake up the next day. Then in September came along, and I went to freshman year and walked the same halls as my rapist, attended class with my rapist, and my brain led me to think that he was around every corner or even parked outside my house. As time passed, sophomore year came along, and that is when I really started to realize my self-worth as an individual. I became involved in a club called Stand Up at my school, and this really gave me a voice and a strength to make a difference. Today, I am able to have the strength to get up and give a speech to all of you about mental health because I truly believe I have came a long way from where I started. I hope you all can be in a mental state where you feel empowered and in control again. I want to inspire the people. I want someone to look at me and say, because of you, I didn't give up. Always remember, your mental health does not define you. Your strength and courage does. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our tellers for getting up and sharing these incredible stories. And you can all breathe because you did it and you made it through. And you guys killed it. You're amazing. I love it. You did so great. So I think we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be back with the panelists. Thank you.
I don't hear. I'll hide it over here. If you want to take a seat, that would be great. Oh, yeah, go for it. Thanks. You are on the far one, yeah. Okay, everyone, we're looking for Christine, Barb, and Cindy, paging the panelists to the front. Barb went to get some water. Oh, water. Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be good. This would be a great opportunity for anyone, if you have questions for the panelists, write them down on your note card that was on your seat, or for the audience online. All right. Christine, Barb. There's Barb. right. Great. Okay, if everyone could grab a seat, we're going to get going with the panel discussion. I'd also like to give a big thank you to all the storytellers. You guys did great and took a lot of courage to get up here. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Tara for all of the work. So if we could have another round of applause for all the storytellers. Thank you guys so much. So to get things started, I will have our panelists introduce themselves. You can just say your name and the organization you're with, or in Isaiah's case, what your experience is.
My name is Cindy Zarnick-Niemeyer. I'm a therapist and prevention specialist at Catalpa Health, contracted to the Appleton School District, alcohol, tobacco, other drug abuse, mental health liaison.
I'm Barb Bagulke. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Suicide Awareness. We're the ones that brought the statewide text line, the Hope Line, into Wisconsin.
I'm Christine Sack. I'm the school-based mental health coordinator at Lutheran Social Services, and I also provide school-based mental health 2 days a week at a local area high school.
My name is Isaiah Donaldson. I'm a former student at Appleton North and a current student at Appleton West, and I am a soon-to-be commissioner in the Sources of Strength group at Appleton West High School.
Great. So to start things off, we all know that teen suicide is a problem. Cindy, could you touch on how prevalent an issue it is here in the Fox Cities and what you're seeing through your work with the school district and Catalpa?
Sure. I also want to add that the work that I do with Catalpa and the school district is one piece, and my other hat is I'm the mom of 4 children who won the jackpot because they got depression and alcoholism on one side and anxiety and alcoholism on the other side. So we've talked about mental health since our kids were littler than you. I'm also a foster parent. So what we see, I will tell you that we're not seeing less, but I will tell you also that thanks in no small part to the Gannett series, things are getting better. You know, people are talking. When you talked about I'm not the only one on my team, you said, I thought, that's right. What we have learned is that we need to gather around children, and that's exactly through the Gannett series what we're doing. You know, we've got the school district staff who know about relationships. We got Catalpa Health and NAMI and the Wellness Screen and PATH and Hope Line and Sources of Strength. And so I wouldn't say that we have fewer mental health issues, but it's getting better because we're talking about it, and children know that they're not alone. And so, you know, part of our goal in all this is to stay the course.
Barbara, Christine, anything you want to add? Or
I think when you break down stigmas of storytelling, these are your stories, these are real people, and education. And how Cindy said, the more you talk about it, the more you're part of the solution.
Okay. All right. My computer scrolled down, bear with me. So you guys talked a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about what your organizations do to help youth before they find themselves in crisis?
Maybe we start with Isaiah, because he's a real upstream.
Okay, so Sources of Strength is, as the name implies, supposed to be like, our group's supposed to be like a source of strength for high schoolers all across Appleton, saying how we have it set at Appleton West, Appleton North, and I heard other schools as well. At Appleton West, we're actually more of this recently started here, so we're a little bit premature in this. Like, we're still trying to spread awareness across the school as to what we are. And like, what we want, our goal is to help, like, let other students know that we're there for them, whether it be they're just starting to feel like, you know, maybe they're depressed, maybe they're they've been feeling this feeling for years upon years. Maybe they just had some type of traumatic experience just happen, and we want to let them know that we're there for them, whether it be the students in our group, like their classmates that they sit right next to. Our group even has teachers into it as well, so they can even know that there are teachers in their math class and their science class that they can go to and that can help them. It's not just the counselors, it's everyone around them. So that's kind of the purpose of our group. We want to be able to help them as much as we possibly can before anything wrong happens.
I recently attended the Sources of Strength breakfast that they had at Appleton East, and I think what's more potentially appealing to students about that program is that it is a lot of peer-based support. It's not adults, kind of sitting behind a desk like traditional therapy is, but it's, peer support in, across the spectrum of friendships and bullying and, everything that you encounter in high school, which I've been at my high school for going on 5 years, and it's much, I grew up in the Appleton School District and loved it, but it's so much different now. But in terms of getting back to the point, I have a tendency to kind of wander, so if you need to rein me in, just rein me in. Okay. Before identifying kids before they get to crisis, the schools with the wellness screening, and we can expand that to more grades than it already is. I think that would be fantastic. I think there's budget money coming from the state that will help identify and get more counselors in schools, which works well for the students, for the parents, for the faculty, everyone that's on board with that. My organization, Lutheran Social Services, we have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, we have an Instagram account. We don't do Snapchat, just because I don't even know how to do that. And then again, we on our website lsswis.org, we have pages about traditional clinic counseling, teen runaway and homelessness services, school-based mental health. We're a statewide agency, and there's a lot of resources that we can offer, not always in the same place, but that they're out there, and through the website you can navigate it to get to who you need to find out about that.
Okay. And Barb, could you touch on the Hope Line and what you guys do?
Sure. How many of you know what the Hope Line is in this room?
Oh,
yes.
Quite a few.
We always take that poll. What the Hope Line is, it's a text-based emotional support line, meaning you can text 24/7, 365 days a year, including holidays, including night times. And what it is there for is for any crisis. And you know what? When we talk about crisis, that's an individual thing. Sometimes people will say, I don't know what crisis is. Crisis could be the breakup. Crisis could be job loss. Crisis could simply be, I'm having a really bad day and I feel alone. And so what the Hope Line is there for is that you can text it in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day. Our lunch hour is one of the highest times for our youth to be texting into it, to say, hey, I'm feeling like I'm alone. I feel like I'm struggling. And you're answered by a live person, not a robot, a live person saying, you're worthy, you're good enough, and I'm here for you, and you're not alone. No situation, no topic is too small. So when you're talking about suicide today, suicide is always in the top 5 of the topics that are brought up on the Hope Line. And so those suicidal thoughts, those suicidal ideations that we heard from our storyteller, the Hope Line is there for you. The bad days, the good days where you're saying, I'm having a good day and I just want to check in with you. That's what the Hope Line is for.
Thank you. Cindy?
I will start with Catalpa Health. Catalpa is mental health, mental wellness for children and adolescents. We have an access center in Appleton, a therapy center. We have day treatment. We've got a center in Oshkosh. We just opened an office in Wapaka and have a new third psychiatrist. So all those things, we have really tremendous community support that allows us to do this work. And I think, again, we're talking about it, thanks in no small part to Gannett. School district, Isaiah talked about sources of strength. What happened was a year or so ago, a number of us went, and there may or may not be an assistant superintendent in the room from the Appleton Area School District. We went to Hortonville, because Hortonville has done great things with sources of strength, and looked at their initiative and their program and came back and said, we need to do this. We're going to pilot it in one school. And our superintendent said, who's now the superintendent, said, no, we're going to do it in all high schools. So there's really a lot of discussion and a lot of support in schools for doing this work. We also have staff trainings, youth mental health first aid, suicide prevention trainings, mental health support for children in schools in terms of small groups and student services. Lots of resources. And again, I think the biggest thing is that we are talking about it and we are recognizing the importance of relationships.
If we're going to take a question from the audience. So Rob Menzer is going to read it for us.
All right. Hi. And I also, if there are more questions, I can come around and get more cards. Here's a quote from Henry David Thoreau. There are 1,000 hacking at the branches for every one who is striking at the root. What is the root cause of these problems? What's being done to strike at the root?
That's a
really
question.
Hard one. Very important.
I mean, I think at least in terms of children and adolescent mental health, identifying younger children, the first speakers, are a great example of the successes that can come when we identify early, seek treatment, and it's not a straight line up, it's up and down, but it's always going to be up and down, because that's the way life is. But I mean, in terms of the root of it, generational poverty, unemployment, unstable housing, parental stress, substance abuse, environments that aren't trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive. Those are some of the root issues, and that is not something I think that any of us could solve, but that's when, a small group of people need to come together, and that is the way that change happens, by momentum.
I was going to add that I totally echo. I mean, that's a bigger issue than I think anyone can tackle. But I think when you're working with, when you talk about the root of something, is getting down to the issue and meeting people where they're at. A lot of times people will say, those are for services or way up there, but how do I apply? And so when I think of initiatives, it's how do you relate to the person in their environment where they feel safe, where they feel comfortable, because that's where you really get the disclosure. I think of our veteran program with our challenge coins that we created that sit in our law enforcement's pockets and squad cars. They're a coin, a simple coin, but to a veteran, a serviceman or a servicewoman, that's a very relatable token of thank you for your service. And that relationship of saying, I recognize this, I recognize your service, and we can talk about it, gets people to disclose. So when we talk about root, we really have to meet people where we're at, not where we think they're at. And certainly, like you talked about, trauma-informed care, we're not broken. It's what the heck has happened to us. Every one of us has a journey. Every single one of us has a story. Some of us have extensive ones, some have shorter ones, depending on how long we've been living here. But we're not to judge anybody, because we really don't ever have walked in somebody's shoes.
Do you have another question?
How can a parent reach a teen who may be in crisis?
Well, some of this is from my parent hat, but I would say if our kids are in crisis, we Velcro them to us. Sometimes we sleep in their bedroom. Sometimes we take them to work with us. But if our children, if they're at a place where we really feel like there's a real strong danger there, we Velcro them to us.
So being a teenager who actually has dealt with depression, I'd say that something very important that parents should do is they should try to be as involved in their child's life as they can. Try to ask them about like each and every individual aspect of their life, because depression doesn't really just come out of the blue. Like, chances are it's coming from a specific part of your child's life. And by analyzing their life and hearing them talk about it, you can kind of pinpoint where some of the conflicts may be coming from. Like maybe their social life is having some problems. So if they talk to you about their social life and problems with their friends, maybe you can talk about them. Talk about that with them and try to resolve that problem with them. And even if things get to a hard point, you can even contact the school and maybe they can even try to help as much as they possibly can. But I'd say that being involved in their life and really kind of getting to know them is very important. And like them just knowing that you're there for them, like that's one of the most important things I can emphasize. Because like when I was dealing with depression, knowing that my mom was there for me, like it meant a lot. Especially being how at this point in my life I didn't really have anybody else. Like it just made me feel comforted.
And I think an important piece to the parent involvement and engagement is that you can't start asking the questions at the point of the crisis. You need to be involved and engaged in exactly what Isaiah was saying, from birth, because a teenager who's struggling with something, if they don't consider you a trusted adult, regardless if you're related or not, they're likely to not be honest with you because they don't have that relationship with you. So yeah, knowing your kids, it's kind of like knowing who your kids' friends are, going to school events to meet the parents of your kids' friends. When I was in grade school, we had an ice cream social every fall. And so with the infamous, everyone here of a certain age will remember the McDonald's orange juice stuff. It was fluid and it was orange. But, like meeting and... Probably not, no. That's a little too broad of a definition. But, being involved in your kids' lives. You don't have to be their friend. They got friends. They need parents.
I would just also add, a lot of this is about brain chemistry. This isn't about you're not strong enough or you're not, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. They've done CAT scans and looked at brains of people who are depressed and people who are not depressed, and those brains are significantly different. So this is about brain chemistry.
Got another one for us?
One of the panelists has mentioned teacher training on mental health, and the question is, does that extend to middle school teachers, elementary school teachers, and are there any peer groups in middle schools?
I can speak to that. Yes, it does. Our staff, and I can speak for Appleton, but I see Mike here from Nina, and there's, all districts across our community have been really working together to do this work. And so, yes, there's training for staff, youth mental health first aid. We have numerous staff trained across the community. So those are community and school trainings. We've got QPR, which is question, persuade, refer, suicide prevention training. The staff are doing PBIS, which is probably a familiar term, where they're learning about all kinds of initiatives with regards to mental health in children. So yes, lots of training and peer group supports at every level. Our peer supports.
For Isaiah, what are the major pressures you're seeing for your peers, and what is the school doing to help these students?
So personally, I have a good handful of friends that have been dealing with depression, and it really does vary from person to person. Some people, a lot of their depression comes from school itself, being like their grades, which then stresses them out because they look at their future, and they're like, literally right now I have my future in my hands, and everything I do is going to affect that. For some people, it's their family. Like, I know some people have been doing great in school, but their family life, like at home in their household, whether it be with their parents or with their siblings, it's just not as healthy as it should be, because maybe they feel like they're getting a lack of attention, or they're not getting as much care as they should be. And I mean, sometimes it even goes out to different branches of their family. Like, I had one friend, his cousins were treating him poorly to a point where he made some very bad decisions, and it made a huge impact on their family after everything that happened with that. So I mean, it really varies. I can't say specifically that it's coming from school or that it's coming from friends or the home. I mean, it's coming from everywhere.
Yeah, we'll keep going with the audience questions here. Get your questions answered.
Yes, please. Here's a easy one. Are there any opportunities to get involved as a volunteer?
Yep. Nonprofits, we rule on volunteerism. And I think sometimes people say, I want to get involved, but they don't know how. Perfect way, volunteer. If you want to be a volunteer as a Hope Line responder, to volunteering at an event, to putting your time and talents. We had somebody come in the other day that just simply wrote out thank you notes and did some mailings. Those are blessings. And so every organization, I'm sure, has some type of volunteerism, but I can tell you for nonprofit world, we bank on it.
Be a foster parent. Our number of children in foster care has about doubled in the last couple of years. Our number of foster parents has stayed about the same. So if you find a place in your life where that fits, that's a fabulous way to help and support children.
Any more over there?
This is an area that we have discussed, but it's a big one. We can see from, for instance, the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why, teens often feel like adults are out of touch, can't relate. What can we adults do to bridge that gap? I say, you start, but others can chime in as well.
So adults in general, I'd say it's really important to just have that connection with us youngins. Like, like, to be honest, like my homeroom teacher even, I mean, I met her halfway through the semester last year, and she's probably one of my favorite teachers at the school. I'd say we have may not be the closest bond, but we have a close enough one. She knows a lot about my life, and she's actually the one that kind of got me into the Sources of Strength group. And all because, I mean, I was just open with her, and she was open with me, and we just kind of had this nice balanced relationship. Whereas some teachers or adults they put like a bridge, or not a bridge, they put like a wall kind of between the minor and them. And I mean, it's important that wall, I mean, yeah, that wall can be there because, there are some things that make, minors and adults different, but I'd say that they should really still keep those connections, and they should still be open with each other. And even just by being open and like letting them get to know each other really just kind of helps create a bond where then like I know if I was going through something and I felt like I had no one to turn to, I could even go to my homeroom teacher, and I mean I know she'd listen to me and she'd care because we have this bond together. And I mean that's important for all adults. I mean anyone that you know, if you just talk to them, make a bond with them, and I mean they're going to want to be open with you. If they ever feel like they have something that they want to talk about, you'll be one of those people that come to mind.
13 Reasons. Has the second season started yet? No. So our understanding, and I think they've probably altered it, what the second season was going to be a suicide and a school shooting. And so my hope is that they've pulled it. One of the things that Mike Altacruz has said is there's never a good reason to show a sexual assault or a graphic suicide or cutting on television. There's just never a good reason for that. The thing I think about, too, especially based on what Isaiah talked about in terms of trusted adults, Sources of Strength is about trusted adults and medical care and mentors and spirituality. There's a whole circle of things that all of us need to be well. And when I think about the show 13 Reasons, did you see any grandmas? Did you see any dogs? Did you see any service work, volunteerism? Did you see any spiritual support or any spiritual community? All those things that we know that support children are absolutely missing in that show.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are almost out of time. Do any of the panelists have any closing thoughts? Anything you want to share? I know Cindy had a couple. Okay. So Cindy, we'll start with you. Let me just pull your stuff up here. All right.
So one of the things I started talking about was stay the course, that we're doing this really good work. There's a lot of good work that's happening, and we need to stay the course. And I love this quote. And this is what we're doing here tonight. We bind ourselves together by taking hold of each other's hands so firmly and forming a circle so strong that if a tree should fall upon it, it could not shake or break it. And that's what we're doing tonight in terms of breaking the no-talk rule and talking and holding hands around our children and holding them up.
I love how you say that. I've heard Cindy say this a couple times, but it is true. You can never have too many resources. You can never have too many people in your corner in life. And the more we work together, despite differences, find those similarities. It is going to take all of us in this, putting our talents, putting our time, and putting our hands in together, that we're going to be able to work on this crisis.
In my office at the high school that I'm at, I've got 8 by 10 neon colored paper laminated with different sayings on it. And some of them are rather long, and which I can't remember. But a couple of things that like I try to instill or emphasize in my own life and in the kids that I work with is that 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, the things that you think people are really concerned about, you, and that kind of falls into that bullying category, you'll realize how little that really has an impact in your adult future life. And also, The Shawshank Redemption is my favorite movie, and I've got quotes from that all over the place. And sometimes it's just, one of the characters said, get busy living or get busy dying. And, we talked a lot. I heard some speakers talk about empowerment, and, it does get better. It will get better. It'll take time, but, you have to have hope. You have to have hope.
Do I have enough time to make 2 quick remarks?
Sure.
Okay, I'm just gonna pull my phone out for 1 second. I made sure to pull this up before I got on stage. So in the sources of strength, it may be really small, but if you Google it, this will pop up online. So this is our sources of strength wheel. It's like a chart that's put into 8 different parts. The first one being family support and positive friends, mentors, healthy activities, generosity, spirituality, medical access, and mental health. So this chart right here, what it's supposed to be is to have like good strength and a healthy lifestyle. You need to have, all of these in your life. You can't just have just one. If I only have mentors but lack the rest, it's not really healthy. It's gonna outweigh and everything will fall apart. So if you know somebody who's struggling, one thing I recommend is trying to help them get stronger and build up in each and every one of these individual parts of the wheel. And if you ever forget what they are, like I said, just hop online, Google sources of strength, and go to images, and the whole entire thing is just all a bunch of different parts of the wheel. And then the second remark that I have is that depression, it happens, and I've dealt with it personally. And looking back, I know it was only a couple of years ago, but I've made a lot of progress since then. At that point in my life, my mom has a handful of other kids, so I always kind of tried to let her, work with them, because I didn't want to be a burden. And looking back, and I didn't have a lot of friends at that time. I remember I was so depressed. I remember looking at my Infinite campus, and it was just a bunch of Fs. I'll admit that, and I didn't care at that point. But now, my mom's like my best friend. I help her all the time, and she helps me. I have a lot of healthy friends. I've been working on getting my grades up, and just overall, now I'm in sources of strength. I've made a lot of progress, and I'm proud of that. And that can happen to anybody. It's just because you hit depression, that may be rock bottom, but that doesn't mean that you can't go back up. It doesn't mean that there isn't more left for you. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. So I have a few things before we go. We launched a podcast about youth mental health. It's called This Is Normal. And in at least one of our podcast episodes, we are going to feature stories from our live events. So please go check it out wherever you listen to podcasts. And I have a quick promo to play for you.
I remember walking into the hospital. Everybody's looking at me and I felt so embarrassed because I was crying and still having my panic attack. And my mom was crying and she's screaming and she's like, we need to get in right now. My daughter just swallowed a bunch of pills. And then I drank the charcoal and that's the last thing I remember.
I've been writing about youth mental health for over 2 years with the Kids in Crisis Project.
We've talked to teenagers and young people from all over the state about how they faced mental health challenges and how they made it through them.
With this podcast, we want to bring their voices directly through your speakers.
That night, if we would have knew if that was our last night, we would have just held on to her.
They handcuffed me, put me in the car. I was back in maximum security, basically, and I never committed a crime. I remember one night I can still remember I was screaming in my cell late at night, all alone.
Every time I talk to a young person about their mental health, I'm amazed at just the openness that they have. I think stigma is really coming down around mental health, and young people are at really the forefront of that push.
I'm Rob Menser. I'm an editor for USA Today Network Wisconsin.
And I'm Rory Linane, a reporter for the network based in Milwaukee.
Welcome to This Is Normal.
Because this is normal.
We need more help. And more help is more progress, because we don't need perfection in mental illness. We need progress so it can be better.
This is Normal, a new podcast about youth mental health, coming in March from USA Today Network Wisconsin. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or find them on our websites.
All right, so the podcast is going to be launching later this month. I would ask you to sign up for our newsletter on your way out if you haven't already. It comes out once a week, so it's not going to clog up your inbox, I promise. It includes links to the latest reporting in the Kids in Crisis series, and it'll keep you informed about other events we're having, like our Day of Action in Madison that's coming up in May. So as more details about that are released, you can get all the info in the newsletter. And last but not least, we would like to give a huge thank you to Tara from Story Catchers for working with our storytellers tonight. Thank you so much. And then we'd also like to thank our panelists and our storytellers for sharing your experience and expertise, and to all of you for being here, whether in person or online. We are truly grateful for your support of the series, so thank you again so much. And with that, be safe out there on the roads. Thank you.